God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable, for you, God, are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I'm going to do a little bit of a faux pas. I'm going to put this on the altar, which might bother some people, but that is okay. The altar is sacred, and we are all sacred. So this is my first time preaching in here. I just want to acknowledge that. I'm very excited about it, but also a little nervous because it's much different than the traditional sanctuary. I have my nice music stand because I'm a manuscript preacher. Eventually I'll have slides, but it's my first time here, so just give me some grace with the slides. So today in the church, we celebrate Good Shepherd Sunday. And in the larger United States around us, people all over are celebrating Mother's Day. I focused on caretaking with the kiddos because we all can relate to that. Each of us has been taken care of by someone at some point in our lives. And we have each taken care of another or many others. If this day is about anything, it should be about caretaking. So keeping that in the forefront, we can intersect this gospel passage with this holiday through that lens. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is the caretaker of us all. We are all Jesus' sheep. However, if we don't keep that at the forefront, we can see that both this passage and this day carry their own interpretations, experiences, and baggage, depending on the person reading it or living it out. Each of us in this room and those of you watching at home can read this passage differently, and each of us experience this holiday in different ways. There are people here for whom Mother's Day is a day of delight, experiencing beautiful gratitude and memories of this day. And there are people here for whom Mother's Day is a day of sorrow, remembering deep pain from their childhoods or even their adulthood. Some people who don't really care about this day at all think it's just another Hallmark holiday or wish it would just go away. Pastor Athena, will you pass me my water? There are people here who are sick of talking about mothers and fathers and parents, who don't want to be parents or who desperately want to be parents but are unable to. There are people who have been pregnant and chosen to give birth, and others who have tried to get pregnant and haven't been successful. There are people who might be currently pregnant and afraid that they won't have safe options available to them soon. There are people who have happily adopted and some who are unable to adopt. There are people here who are estranged from the families they were brought up in, people who never actually had a family to call their own, people rejected from their families, people on good terms with their families, but who are in distant relationships with them. There are many different types of people experiencing this day differently. This day is a joyful day, and it's a hard day. It's an annoying day, and it's just a day. I was researching the history of Mother's Day, and I found out that while the holiday was named in the U.S. in 1914, there have been mothering festivals going on for centuries. The ancient Greeks used to honor mother goddesses on a special day, and the early Christians had a day set aside to honor their mother church, the main church in their neighborhood. In the U.S., the holiday was created by Anna Jarvis in order to honor the work her mother, Anna Reeves Jarvis, had done. Before the Civil War, Anna Reeves Jarvis started Mother's Day work clubs. Someone's phone is definitely blowing up. Work clubs in West Virginia in order to teach local women how to properly care for their children. Later, after the war, she began Mother's Friendship Day, at which mothers gathered with former Union and Confederate soldiers to promote reconciliation between them. Although Mother's Day was officially declared a holiday in 1914, by 1920, Anna was disgusted by the ways that the day had been commercialized and urged people to stop buying flowers and cards and candies for the day. She even began lobbying against it, trying to get it removed as a national holiday, when initially she had lobbied for it to become a national holiday. By the time of her death, she had disowned Mother's Day altogether. Years later, in 1968, Mother's Day was reclaimed by Coretta Scott King, who used the day to host a march in support of oppressed women and children. As you can hear from the history of these different types of mothering days, this day has always been nuanced. From goddesses to churches, to teaching, to abolition, to reconciliation, to honoring one's parent, to commercialization, to protest, to recognizing and supporting BIPOC people, to equal rights and equity. There are nuances that exist across history regarding this day, and there are nuances that exist today in each of our histories, each of our families, each of our stories, each of our bodies. This is a day of deep pain and of celebration. And so instead of thinking it as a day that celebrates a specific type of person, a cis, hetero woman who gave birth to or adopted a child, I want to think of it as a day that celebrates caretaking. The caretaking we receive from Jesus and the caretaking we give in response. The caretaking that brings about a deep sense of love and belonging. The passage from today is about Jesus telling his followers that they belong. That like sheep belong to a shepherd, they belong to him. Not in an ownership way, but in the way that something you deeply care for belongs to you. It belongs to your heart. We as a community of faith at CTK need to strive more towards creating this sense of belonging. While there are many types of people in this room and watching at home, this community in many ways is still largely homogenous. In our strives to be more inclusive, CTK has a strategic direction that states welcoming and embracing all people. In that, CTK is striving to be, quote, a welcoming and affirming church for Black and brown people and for the LGBTQIA+ community, end quote. And while this is a wonderful start, and I would not have been called here by the North Carolina Synod or by this congregation if this was not a goal. I want us to go beyond welcome. We need to expand on this. We, the people of CTK, need to be a place where people belong. See, the difference between being welcomed and belonging is the difference between saying, you can come through the door and we will be nice to you, and showing that we want you to be here and we want you to be yourself. Whoever that is. That you don't have to change or be a certain way, or have families that look like ours. There is no us. That we are all different and beautiful in our own ways. That you can come in and sit here on a day rooted in such nuance and confusing and challenging and upsetting and joyful and weird history and not feel out of place, or that you don't belong because your journey is not like most of the people in the room. You belong here just as you are, and you also belong to Jesus. A question that has been centered in this passage is, who belongs to Jesus? People have wondered, do some belong to Jesus while others do not? Are some in and some out? But we all belong to Jesus. All things belong to Jesus, despite whether we believe in him or not. And we belong not because he owns us, but because he promises to take care of us. He promises to go after us. This is what many Lutherans believe. We believe that Jesus is constantly going towards us. He is constantly choosing us, constantly saving us, constantly loving us, constantly holding us. And Jesus is constantly calling to us, all of us. And sometimes we can hear his voice, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes we choose to ignore his voice, and sometimes, some people, choose to speak for his voice, saying things that, according to the gospel, Jesus would never say. So we have to know how to recognize Jesus' voice. New Testament professor Elizabeth Johnson writes, "The voice of the Good Shepherd is a voice that liberates rather than oppresses. It does not say, 'Do this, and then maybe you will be good enough to be one of my sheep.' It says, 'You belong to me already. No one can snatch you out of my hand.'" End quote. Sometimes when we push Jesus away, his voice gets quieter, and sometimes it gets louder. And sometimes when we're following Jesus closely, the voice gets louder, and sometimes it gets quieter. But no matter how we hear it, we know what the core of the voice is telling us to do the things the Good Shepherd does. The Good Shepherd is the one who continually goes after his sheep, who continually calls them even when they've strayed away, who continually binds up their wounds when they've become broken, who continually welcomes them back even when they've tried to live in other fields and with other farm hands. Jesus will never let them get snatched from his hand. We will never get snatched from Jesus' hand. The voice of the Good Shepherd is constantly calling to us, pulling us in closer, telling us that we belong here. We belong with Jesus. We, as the people belonging to the Good Shepherd, are called to care for one another as Jesus cares for us, to show one another that we belong to each other as we belong to him, to love one another, to liberate one another, to stand up for one another, to give to one another, to feed, to clothe, to house, to give medical care to, and to protect one another. This is how we show that we belong to each other, no matter how different you feel in this space. No matter how difficult this week has been for you or what this day might bring up for you, you belong here and you belong to Jesus. You belong to the great caretaker. You are seen and known just as you are. You are always held in the care of Jesus. And no matter what, you will never, ever, ever be snatched out of his hand. Amen.